Coming up, not what you call the perfect debut for the new Big Three in Brooklyn. The Nets fall to the New Orleans Pelicans in what turned out to be not much of a contest. We're going to get into what was a lack of energy out of the gates, where they fell down on the interior glass, rebounding a real issue here. But ultimately, looking at the three most important players on this roster and asking, where were they when the tip-off officially began? We break it down next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, for better or worse, the Brooklyn Nets. Every single day over there, you're going to find Doug Norrie, owner-operator of DFSR, for all your daily fantasy sports rankings. From DraftKings to FanDuel, he's got you covered. I'm Adam Arbrecht, breaking down the New York Football Giants on the One Giant podcast with my boy Andy Mack. We thank you for making us your first listen of the day, free on all those great platforms. And Doug, that's just not the way the journey's supposed to begin, right? You know, Lord of the Rings started out in a shire, a lot of beautiful sunshine, guys just romping around. This felt more like the desolation of Smaug.
Yeah, nice Tolkien. First game of the season, and it went as bad as you could possibly expect. This was a brutal loss for the Nets. It never looked close. It was probably going to end up being like the second worst, probably third worst blowout of the second night of basketball, this Wednesday of basketball, and in a game that, by two teams that want to contend, and one looked like they had it all together, and the other, that was the Pelicans, and the other team looked like they had never seen a basketball court, at least for the first 12 minutes or so of this game. We'll go through all of the stuff that happens, but this was about as uninspiring as it gets from the Nets, short of, a Kevin Durant, did what he needed to do, but even early it was a struggle for him. So this was hate to bury the lead here, but this was about the opposite of how you wanted to start the season.
130-108, the Brooklyn Nets fall to the New Orleans Pelicans at home. And you said it there. We'll get to Kevin Durant, the concerns again here now for Ben Simmons potentially, just so we talk about something that happened in the preseason, now happened in game number one. But right out of the gates, just a lack of energy. It seemed like a lack of focus on the offensive end specifically. I mean, even defensively, it was pretty much a leaky sieve there to start, but just no rhythm for whatever they accomplished in those last two preseason games, and some sense of this is how we want to work. This is what the offensive game plan can look like. They came out and it was as if it was preseason games number 1 and 2. We're not really sure where Ben's going to go with the ball, who's going to be, running the offense, what type of sets are we going to get into. It all just seemed to go out the window. And there, again, you mentioned urgency. It just didn't seem to be like it's opening night. I mean, just high level. It's opening night of your NBA season. If you're not dialed in to put on a pretty big performance, I don't know what's going to get you up for game time. And it just seemed like the Nets weren't ready for the first 12 minutes. Yeah,
it just looked so sloppy to start. I mean, like little things, right? Losing the ball in traffic. Durant really struggled, made some mistakes early, like the over and back to the Claxton. It's just brutal. That's just mental error, right? There was a couple times where they lost it in kind of going toward the rim. Ball just kind of slips out of their hands. Did miss some easy shots too. Missed a ton of bunnies at the rim, kind of from everybody, especially early. And then it was just really, really hard to dig themselves out of the hole. Even when, went on some runs, had it to within single digits at halftime, which kind of felt like a miracle. But in the end, we'll go through some of the stats too. They just got brutalized in a couple of different areas. But to your point around the urgency, that movement, that kind of, some of the actions that they were running, trying to get into just different motion kind of offense, that looked not there at all. I don't, maybe if they ran some of that stuff 5 to 8 times total, I'd be really, really shocked. It was just on the offensive end. They struggled with, we some things we knew were going to happen. Like we knew that they're probably going to struggle a little bit with the Pelicans' length. We went over this in the pregame. That's a huge team. They just played against. It's a really, really long team. Zion is a problem. Obviously, Valanciunas was a problem. But on the offensive end, they just really, none of the stuff that really looked like it was working that we got really excited about in the preseason just didn't really materialize. Sometimes it can happen because of energy. Because it can happen because they were scouted pretty well and Pelicans cut off some of those actions before they even got started, which definitely happened. But in the end, it just never, it's like they never started really. Like even when they were within 9, like, did you ever feel confident? I didn't. I never felt, to the point where with they were down 20 with like 8 minutes left. I was like, don't even bring Durant back in. Just have him play 28 minutes and let's just go home. Like, it's just fine. You lose. It's okay. You're not going to win the game. I get you want to, give your fans something. Just don't even put the miles in these guys. And that was really you can just kind of see it from when they started.
Yeah. I think you're 100% right. Like, and I'm just surprised by it. Like, I'm just surprised that that's the way it looked coming out. You mentioned Kevin Durant, the high level there. By the end of this one, he ends up having a stat line that looks like Kevin Durant, but
fine.
Yeah, right. It's all good. Fine. Like by the end of it, but like, that's the difference of looking at a box score on the back end of a game and saying, well, you lost the game, but where did you struggle? And just, I want to get into maybe what the Pelicans were doing successfully, though. Again, at least early, I didn't feel like it was, it was 80-20, doing it to ourselves, 20%, you guys impacting us. The second quarter, as you said, where they closed it a little bit tighter, I thought you saw the combination of the defense and that intensity starting to aid what they could do on the offensive end. Gave up 32 points in the first quarter. You outscored, let's be clear, 32-14 in the first quarter of this game, right? So that's what I talk about when not coming out, that sense of urgency. And then from the big picture standpoint, just when we talk about where they were in this game, it's funny. I think my biggest gripe early, because I want to try to stay chronological with the game, is that there didn't seem to be a lot of the penetration into the paint and looking to build opportunities off of that. Whether it's Kyrie Irving getting downhill and attacking at the glass, I think he only had 4 points going into the second quarter of this game. It wasn't Ben Simmons getting in there and finding shooters out on the perimeter. They didn't even really have a lot of perimeter looks until you actually got to the point where Patty Mills started to pour in some from the outside. And without him, that would look like even more of a tragic stat line, which ends up being 30% from beyond the arc.
Yeah, so some of my notes from early in this game was that the Pelicans' length was definitely giving the Nets problems on the offensive end. I mean, on both sides of the ball, it was giving them problems. But when the Nets, again, when they were trying to generate offense early, some of these actions were just cut down by the fact that the Pelicans are big. And if you can't start some of that movement, there's going to be side effects, like they can't get dribble penetration. They could not get into any pick and roll, short roll stuff at all. Like the paint just looked like it had 16 bodies in it all the time, right? Like part of that is because that starting unit lacked probably one shooter to like really, really punish the spacing. Without Harris and no Curry, that's going to be a problem. Royce O'Neal, we love Royce O'Neal. He's just not that guy, right? And so missing a shooter with the two guys that the Nets really, really need in Harris or Curry, made it so that when you play a super long team like this early, it's just, you have to be have like pinpoint precision. And if you don't, it's going to look like it looked, and it's going to look like there's nowhere to move. It's going to look like you're really packed in. It's going to look like stagnated offense. It's going to look like picking up dribble. But Simmons picked up his dribble a ton in this game, in the minutes that he was able to stay on the court before he just hacked everything in sight. And so I think that's what it was. It was like, and that's what leads to what looks like stagnation / ISO ball. It's fine to play some ISO. Like Kevin Durant's going to get into situations where he has a mismatch. Less so when it's Herbert Jones, Brandon Ingram, Zion, guys like this on the other side of the ball. It's going to be less easy to find, or harder to find some of those mismatches. But just in general, one's floor spacer short, plus the Pelicans' length, plus some indecisiveness on the Nets is what led to just what ends up looking sloppy and slow, right? It's not just because, I don't think it's all energy. It's not like I wouldn't call them lethargic. Sometimes lethargy can look like you just kind of getting outplayed on one end of the court, and it looks like you just can't get into the things that you're trying to run. And those were my notes earlier. It's like they just can't get into any of these actions.
Yeah, and maybe you're right. Maybe that ends up tricking the eye into saying, not being engaged, which we all know. It's not like they walk out there and aren't ready and locked in for a game like this to kick off the season. But when you're being outplayed or when you're getting beaten to the spot on some of the things that help set up those early sequences for your offense, it starts to carry over here. So in a second, I do want to pay one little bit of respect over to Zion Williamson, who stepped back out on the court here, but then we'll get back into, again, a key concern around Ben Simmons, fouls out of this game. And if the Nets are going to be a team that plays with a little bit more length, but not necessarily size, the way in which he approaches the defensive end of the floor is clearly going to be a factor for him early on in the season.
All right, we'll get into some more of that. Got some Zion thoughts, obviously, some Simmons thoughts, some rebounding thoughts, tons of thoughts here. Also appreciate everyone that's over there in YouTube throwing some questions. As a reminder, we'll go through our regular episode here, and then we'll jump into YouTube questions at the tail end, as we will be doing all season long in post games. First, going to tell you about our friends over at betonline.net, your number one source for all your football and basketball betting this season. You can get into over there right now. There's going to be time when you listen to this Thursday morning. Clippers -5.5 against the Lakers. It's basically a home game. Go over there to Bet Online. Grab the Clippers on that one. I didn't see enough from what's happening over there in LA. Going to be maybe some frustrated fan bases out here between the Lakers and the Nets. Bet Online's got you covered with all of that and more. Your number one spot for all of your betting information. It's not just NBA, obviously football. Like I said, MLB as you roll through the playoffs, MMA, boxing. If you're into that on the weekends, betonline.net has you covered. Head on over right now to learn about all the different trends, all the different action. Bet Online, where the game starts.
Okay, so before we do dive into what I think could be an area of concern, and then there's a lot here. I do want to, on the back end of this episode, talk about a couple of bright spots, albeit them very small, and you had to kind of sift through some of the soot to see if that lump of coal was a diamond. Zion Williamson, though, we talked about him in the preseason game and just being excited to see him get back out there on the court. I as a fan of basketball, that kid, he literally was running up and down the court on every sequence, grinning ear to ear. Yeah. Like you could just see he was just happy to be out there playing basketball and having one heck of a game for himself.
He's a wrecking ball, man. If you like basketball, and he was one of the reasons that last year was super weird, not have a season from him after he was coming off just an amazing season the season before. Yeah. Total wrecking ball, plays with joy, everything else. In the battle of guys who didn't play last year, I would say Zion came out on top of Simmons in this one. I don't know. But
oh yeah. The old scale starting to shift here a little bit.
A little harder to use the haven't played in a year excuse for your guy when the other guy who hasn't played in a year with the foot issues drops a 25-9, 3 and 4 on you and looks like in 30 minutes and looks like it could have been way more, except that the game just ended up being a blowout. Yeah. So you have to be happy for Zion. He's super, super easy to root for. And I don't really have anything else to say about it. He's a problem, man. He's going to make the Pelicans are good. I will say when it gets to the end of the year, okay, first of all, this is just one game and there's 82 of them. Not going to go 82-0. That's just kind of what happens. I do think at the end of the year, if the Pelicans can stay healthy, this is a really good team. It's not like they lost to some dumpster fire team here. Like this is a team that's going to win a lot of games with this, even if like they can even maintain, they can sustain some injuries and be good. So I think from that respect, I don't think we need to go totally nuts. Yeah. Again, the Nets look like total crap, but the Pelicans are at least a good team. But yeah, I'm reaching for anything here. But
had it been the Orlando Magic, we could have been feeling, even dimmer about things coming out of a post game like this. To your point, it's only game number 1, but you mentioned comparing two guys coming back after time away from the game. Ben Simmons gets out there in this one, and again, some of the things offensively, it kind of goes hand in hand about what the defense is doing, because then he ends up, I think, looking worse when the offense doesn't have its full flow, right? When you're not getting the off-ball movement and when he isn't able to maybe operate in transition, especially, by the way, not a lot of transition basketball for the Brooklyn Nets in this one. That's what happens when the guys are scoring on you with a level of consistency.
You can't get into transition when they either score or they miss a shot and get the offensive rebound and then score. Right. Like when that's the flow of outcomes. You aren't going to get into transition. Go ahead.
No, 100%. So there's that element to why things look even worse and compound some of the problems. But let's just stay focused here. 23 minutes for Ben Simmons before he fouls out with a grand total of 5 rebounds and 4 points. Like, I'll say that he has to find a way. And again, game number 1 of 82. But he's got to find a way, because we saw it in the preseason games as well. those little light fouls, he can't afford to take those. Like, some level of his defensive aggression, which certainly gives him every opportunity in the world to create steals, to create turnovers, to create fast break opportunities, and to meet guys at the rim, by the way, because there's more than a handful of instances in this game where you saw things defensively that I think we can like, right? We liked Kevin Durant meeting Ingram at the rim and denying him. Nicholas Claxton came up with them. The problem in a game like this is that we are few and far between just when we're having a discussion around the positives you try to take away from it. So if you're Ben Simmons, I think he may have caught one on the, I don't know if he caught one on the offensive end out of the fouls that got him out of the game here. But you've got to find a way to be both intense on that end of the floor and then also navigate the fact that you are not only the defensive anchor in a lot of ways for this team, but you're also by default, you are the motor for the offense too. So I was frustrated by the fact that Ben Simmons seems to maybe have a lack of refinement to his game, that having not seen him for a while now in the NBA, I now come back and go, okay, for whatever it's worth, everyone that wants to troll Ben Simmons, whether from Philly or otherwise, and saying, hey, like, just beware. It's not all perfect with him. And I think tonight was a good example of where things can get bogged down and when his exuberance to back out on the court can actually hurt him fouling out in 23 minutes. And Doug will get his mic turned on here, and then he'll dive back in with the conversation.
A little bit of a hiccup there with the
That's
old.
okay.
So if you saw that on YouTube, probably get cut out of the podcast. So I missed a little bit what you said there, but just my thing jumped out. But in general, the Simmons piece was the energy levels there. I mean, I would say a lot of this was mental too. Like the fifth foul was so terrible. Like
that's my biggest problem. Two of these fouls were just a pure Like I'm frustrated, or I'm trying to. Frustrated by the game and not frustrated by the circumstance, situation, or the player you're going against. Go ahead.
Totally. Like it kind of like reminded me of the sort of like what was happening with the Timberwolves in the playoffs last year with Cat. It's just like all mental. It's like just mental errors that you can't do that. You're too important to the team to take ticky-tack fouls in non-crucial situations. They need everything from him. He drew the Zion assignment. That's always going to be hard. It's going to be a season where he has by far the toughest defensive assignments. And that's just going to be the situation for him. He's seemed to have welcomed that, and he should. But if you're going to play 23 minutes and go, this more fouls than you had assists or rebounds, what's the expectation here? Now, it's not going to be every game. These things won't happen all season long. It's troubling to see it happen at all, of course. And it could be something of a roller coaster with this one, right? And so, and I didn't say that this one, like meaning the guy, I don't know. I can't make any excuses for it. It was terrible. It was a total F. There's no other way to say it. I thought he did an admiral-ish job in the few minutes at the beginning that he was dealt a very difficult defensive assignment. That is about where the superlatives stop. Everything else was horrible, and it's one game. I'm not going to just rewrite my whole Ben Simmons thought process here because of it. But if you were looking as for a game to be a stepping stone for what you wanted to see from a player, this was not it. That's basically it.
It was a stepping stone, but it was two steps down that you'll need to now make up when you want to go in the right direction. And just overall, when you talk about coming out of this, because he fouls out there in 23 minutes, but across even the starting lineup, just looking at Durant and O'Neal both on 4 fouls, 3 for Claxton, Kyrie Irving with 3 fouls, just to round this out, because there's a couple I think of, again, little things that I liked in this game, couple of nice things to point to. This is all mostly crap, let's just be clear. But I also think that in that first half, we mentioned Kevin Durant, basically non-existent for the entire first quarter, starts to come on in the second quarter, and that's fine. But again, you're the tone setter here for the team. And if you're going to need to go to ISO ball, it should be happening sooner than later. He looked just unable to find his rhythm there in his first 3-4 shots. You mentioned the turnovers as well. And then Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving finished this game with 15 points on 6 of 19 from the field. 5 assists in this one. He did come away with a couple of steals as well. But for everything that I talked about him and his intensity and what he was bringing from the preseason into the regular season, I wonder again, specifically on the offensive end, if this is the hardest part of the growth process, not just the impact of a team like the Pelicans and their length, but also, is there the ready switch to be flipped when Ben Simmons, when it's clunky, when we're not getting our transition offense, which is going to be easier for Simmons to be the one leading? Is Kyrie Irving ready to take control of that? How is Ben Simmons then going to play off of that on the offensive end? So that's what I thought we also got a real sample size here of is, hey, when it's not running right, there are going to be real ugly stretches for this team on that end of the court.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. It's just going to be they need a lot to go right here. They need a lot of fluidity. They need their team to play very fluidly. They can't play bully ball like you saw the Pelicans. I thought the Pelicans played a really nice game, so this is not a knock against them. But they just can't play bully ball against the Pelicans. Like they can't play bully. This is not like they can change their game. They need to kind of play one way stylistically, and if it's not going to work,
that's a good point.
They're just going to have real problems. And I think we just saw a good example of that tonight. Again, it's not going to be every game, but if you were looking for reasons to kind of feel really positive to start the season, it's going to be really, you're not going to be able to find them anywhere in this one.
I was going to say, so coming up in a second, we'll try to find a couple of the positives, which aren't necessarily going to be related to the starting lineup. Individual players here, I thought maybe a couple of nice things here, but as the team overall, as we've said, not a lot to buy into here out of game number one. We'll talk about that all next. Okay, so the one thing I will say, which I think got lost pretty quickly in this one, and I made the effort on social. I said, let's put Royce O'Neal's jersey to the rafters, right? I think he's ready to go up. He did everything in the first half of this game, which falls by the wayside because they were getting their butts kicked. I thought that Royce O'Neal, in terms of just seeing what he looks like, gets the starting nod here without Joe Harris, without Seth Curry. He did everything you wanted, and I think showed, again, some of that physicality we liked in the preseason. He sized up in a couple of matchups, held his own on the defensive end. Offensively, I like that he was able to take a guy off the dribble and get at the basket. Now, the perimeter shooting, which the team overall lacked in this one, that's not something I think, at least early days here, it doesn't look like Royce is going to be the pull-the-trigger guy from the outside and give you some of those buckets. But he had a solid game for whatever it's worth in a terrible loss. And Doug will come back in here and give me his thoughts in a second, I'm sure, as he just sorts out a couple of technical things. We remind everybody, thank you for bringing it in on the YouTube Live. We're going to tap into those questions here in a second once we wrap this one up. The other thing, and I'm saying other thing as if there's a real positive secondary option here. It was actually going to be Cam Thomas, but I'll focus in on just a couple of these stats here. You talk about getting out rebounded in this game. I'm shocked that this one finishes with 25 trips to the free throw line for the Pelicans, 24 for the Brooklyn Nets, because there was a stretch in this game where the Brooklyn Nets could not touch the air without getting a whistle blown on them. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't have been fouls. I'm just saying that there was a length of time here where this team could not get out of their own way. And when we think about those second chance opportunities, obviously, and there's two stats here we can talk about. Defensive rebounds, the Nets get out rebounded by 10 there. Offensive rebounds, 21-9. So a nightmare on the boards. And then on top of that, what I actually find, Doug would probably say this can sometimes be encouraging because I don't think the defense was terrible. The closeouts weren't bad, but 12 of 26 from beyond the arc for the Pelicans, and that's going to bury you 8 days a week as well. I actually thought defensively the team was in the right spots. The switches were good. That, in a lot of ways, gets grossly overshadowed because you have a bad first quarter. The offense is dragging its feet completely. So by the time you get a chance for them to get back involved, it really doesn't matter. So a couple of those little things there. We'll check back in with Doug.
Yeah, I'm here. So I'm dealing with some I'm dealing with some various technical issues.
Dude, I vamped.
I'm not really sure where they're stemming from, so sorry about that. Podcast rolls on. Yeah, look, the Nets group that wants a center on their team. This one they were licking their chops probably to want to see bigger bodies on the court. It's not helpful to say. I'm still not in that camp to just sign sort of dead weight to be a tall person sitting under the basket. A lot of these ones really have very little to do with their size and more had to do with effort. So I think that a lot of this stuff could just be efforted away. There was no box out, second chance points. They're just going up looking for the basket rather than getting a body to get out of the way. A lot of that was like more fundamental than it was actually a size problem. It was more like, it wasn't like the guys were going up and over them a lot. It was more that they just weren't keeping them away from the basket in a fundamental way, which, like, even guys like Sharp, who are not going to have issues with size, were not doing this. So I think
he bothered. That was the one that bothered me. Sorry, yeah, that was the one that bothered me, was Daron Sharp, who has the size and yet just seemed to be positioning him or not positioning himself to be able to be there for those rebounds. A lot of those second chance opportunities for the Pelicans really just felt like, again, energy or effort or whatever it is, but positioning and fundamentals and boxing out and getting bodies on it and using all the length that you have. Like, the Nets are going to be predicated on some gang rebounding opportunities. There are supposed to be nights where it's Kyrie Irving or guard X sweeping in for the rebound because the other bigger bodies are occupying the bigs for the opposition. Didn't see any of that in this one. A lot of sequences where it was even on the offensive glass as well, by the way, which I was a little bit surprised by too. A lot of the offensive sequences, second chance opportunity wise, loose rebounds, it was Nicholas Claxton going in there on his own or someone by themselves. There was not a lot of concerted effort offensively to try to do some of the gang rebounding as well, get some of those second chance opportunities. A lot of the bounces just didn't go their way and got away from them on the offensive end. But I'm surprised that a team that has length, has speed, as far as transition defense goes, I would expect them to want to be on the glass a little bit more, try to be a little bit more disruptive on that end.
Yeah, I think I do think too, at some point you're down 20 and it's just hard to muster the cavalry. Like, I think that's a sort of the nature of the NBA sometimes, is that when you can sort of see the writing on the wall and you can look up at the scoreboard just as well as everybody else and know, hey, we're down 23. It's just hard to have effort at that point. And when you're up 23, it's significantly easier to have effort because it feels like everything's going your way. It's not an excuse by any means, but you will see that sometimes happen where games, when one team is essentially emotionally waved the white flag, which is what the Nets had done, and it will just continue to look like a death spiral in the effort department. And that's where I think the Nets were here. So this is not an excuse. Like, this is bad. You don't want to be in this spot. They put themselves in a terrible spot by just having to just play catch up the entire time. And then by nature of that, it looks worse and worse and worse. And as a fan or watching the game, you become really honed in on every little interaction at that point, because you're like, well, we can't get back into the game if this happens. If there's just, here comes another wide open three, or here comes this. But a lot of it is just because the negative snowball is already rolling downhill. And yeah, I think that was just kind of the nature of what was happening here. And it's really, really disappointing. Like, this is at home. You're coming off a strong last two games of the preseason. This is the game to really step it up. The momentum should be there for you, and to just get down so much early and to never really be able to muster a comeback, and again, to never have it look close is just so bad. And the offensive rebounding was just so atrocious. That's not going to be the case every game with these guys. Just, this is a really, really good rebounding team between, Valanciunas and Zion, and even Ingram, and some of the Herbert Jones, a big guy. Crazy, amazing block on Durant on the 3-pointer. Like, you're not going to see that all season. Will there be another time where Durant has a corner three blocked by another guy? Like, that will just never happen. But it's just indicative of what this team is like. And they just kind of did every little thing like that correct. And it just made the Nets look bad.
No pressure on Patty Mills. Comes into this one, lights it up from the perimeter, as we all knew he would, coming off the preseason where he looked like he was about to just dig himself a shallow grave. And
give him the game ball. He was great.
We're in the locker room here, Cotton, and they're going to hand out a game ball to Patty Mills off the bench. But he comes in and does his thing. Just to round out this conversation on this game overall, the guy that I did mention before, mostly because nobody that came in off the bench really gave you anything. I'm actually shocked. You talk about a game that isn't going your way. Daron Sharp was 1 of 8 from the field, and let's just be clear, those 8 attempts are within 6 inches of the basket, so you can get a sense of the way this game was going. But I thought, even though it ends up being a really small sample size, I'll give the tip of the cap to Cam Thomas, who came into the game, and I'm paying this as the highest possible compliment. He looked like a guy that was comfortable being out there on both ends of the floor. He had a nice little drop-off pass in the lane where he penetrated and dropped it off to Claxton, took a shot when he had it from the outside, didn't go down for him. That's okay. And then defensively, I think maybe he's actually showing capable of staying in front of some people. When you talk about being a small guard out there on the floor, he at least showed himself to be able to serve the role on that end. And if it's something we're just talking about, it's not about building on things here, but these are positive things to see out of guys that come in here. Cam did get into the game a little bit earlier than maybe we expected. The Nets were also down by 20 most of the way here.
Yeah, I mean, we're really reaching deep here.
By the way, I said it before I go. The other positive, well, loosely positive. I mean, there's not a lot else you can say about this game. It was a bad game. They looked terrible. I'm not going to tell you that it changes my perception of what this team can do this season. I am going to tell you our prediction episode about the over-under for season win totals. That's going to be fluid here over the start of the year. Back at the top, like you said, though, a team like the Pelicans, that's a different barometer than playing against some of the bad teams in the league, where I think you can make some mistakes, learn on the fly a little bit more, and not have to worry about getting, the compounding interest of making a mistake against a good team like the Pelicans are.
Yeah, and we talked about this early part of the season. I went over this a couple weeks ago that this was going to be a tough stretch. They have a tough stretch of games here to start the year. They play 5 tough teams. It's going to be, and some of these teams are, similar iterations to what they were last year or improved. And this was always going to be tough out of the gate. I have a couple we'll get into this tomorrow. Maybe I'll do a little on the YouTube, but mostly I'm very confused by the Edmund Sumner minutes here. Can get into more of that tomorrow a little bit, just in terms of like what the sort of questioning why that happened at all. As everyone on YouTube knows right now, we're going to end the podcast, the formal podcast, but as we've been doing with the live YouTube, make sure you stick around. We'll try to answer some of the questions that have been firing away here in chat. It has been an absolute flamethrower here in chat. I can see where some of the themes have gone on this one. So if you're listening to the podcast, make sure you head on over to YouTube and subscribe over on YouTube. You can jump into these live game chats. That's the number one way to help the podcast. Subscribe wherever you listen, including YouTube. I'll put the link in the show notes.
And of course, the NBA season is officially underway, and that means one ring to rule them all, one ring to find them, one ring to bring them all, and in the darkness, bind them. Lord of the Rings.
You could have said J.R.R. Tolkien. That's who wrote it. Let's just R.I.P., man.
I want to leave it out there that maybe I wrote it. Maybe it was me. Maybe.
Like, wow, where did Adam come up with that? You should put that in a book becomes one of the greatest, trilogy, the greatest works of fantasy fiction of all time. Okay, all-time great poets. We'll be back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Oh, that's how the episode ends, friends. And now we're into the post-game party where we unbutton that top button of our shirt. Doug's going to take off his hat and whip it across the room in a fit of sadness. You mentioned, we'll obviously get into the questions here. Everybody in on the YouTube conversation. I will quietly remind Doug to stop our recording for our audio side. And I would assume that everyone is on. Okay, 2 themes, I'm guessing. Let me go top my head. I'm like, who was that lady? Johnny Carson with the envelope, the great Zarnak. Need a big. Obviously, everyone sucks. Bench Nicholas Claxton, bench Day'Ron Sharp. Also touching envelope to head. Steve Nash should be fired yesterday. Can we assume? Safe to say, guys? How do we feel?
Yeah, those are easy. I saw those coming a million miles away. I'm still fine with this big thing. Look, Valanciunas is a really good player. It's not like these are just guys off the street that were dominating him on the glass. It's, adding a Hassan Whiteside wouldn't have done anything for this situation. I don't think really. Right. Like what you give away and all the other elements of the game. We're going to talk about this every freaking episode, but what you give away in other elements of the game the juice isn't worth the squeeze. Again, the Nets have big enough bodies effectively to have dealt with it. I just don't think that's why it was happening. And there will just be some games like the Pelicans are likely to win the offensive rebounding game against a lot of teams because that's just how they're built. They're built like the Nets needed to be out in transition more. They needed to be out in motion more, and they just weren't. And when you're not going to do that, it's going to make a team like this look really, really good. Like the Nets played into everything the Pelicans want to do, and the Nets just didn't really have an effective counter. Some of that I think is the coaching to not maybe have another sort of card to play here. And I think that's just the way the Nets are kind of built at this point. You saw the lack of spacing as a problem. It's going to be a problem for as long as if Edmund Sumner's minutes are not like Seth Curry and Joe Harris, this is going to be the problem. We'll talk more about Sumner tomorrow, but they could really use another shooter. They didn't have it. I'm not sure it totally tips the scales, but that's kind of where they were.
Just checking a stat there. Yes, I agree with you. Yeah, I think it's where it is. Dan, you were mentioning though, you said you want to talk about him a little bit tomorrow, but what can we really learn anything about the rotation piece when a game is like this? They stuck with the starters. They stuck with the tight unit for the most part. I gave a little bit of compliments to Cam Thomas, but obviously we don't care about the Kessler Edwards, even Yuta Watanabe. Markieff Morris doesn't show up in this game at all in any significance. So having it be that Sumner is the player that plays 19 minutes and 19 minutes. Yeah, 19 minutes and plays it in some key spots. What about his performance confused you, about his usage, about his presence? What did you like or not like about that?
Well, he didn't look very good in the preseason.
Sure.
And he barely played because he kind of sat out the last one. And I just am shocked that he played this many minutes. I just didn't think that he showed you enough in preseason. I'm fine having him on the team. I think it's a nice piece to work on. But what did you see in the preseason that he should come out and play? I mean, some of these were garbage time, but he played third most bench minutes. Would you ever have predicted that was going to happen going into this game? There's no chance. And we knew he was healthy, but there's just no chance that that would have been the prediction because he didn't do anything to show
to
you
warrant
that,
being someone that
to
should be out
warrant
there.
this kind to warrant him playing here. And so I'm just surprised by it. I don't know. I don't know what the other move would have been. I mean, maybe just more Cam Thomas stuff. Maybe like they needed his length because he is kind of, at least for a guard, a little bit bigger and a little bit longer. And that was becoming an increasing problem for the Nets. So maybe they just kind of pivoted at some point, but not really. I mean, he was pretty quick off the bench. So I'm just surprised. I don't know. I just didn't see enough from the preseason. I thought he was going to be end of the bench guy who kind of work his way back into the mix. And for him to come out here, be part of whatever, like the second rotation. And I will say too,
and no Joe Harris.
This will be a little bit of a repeat because we'll talk about it on the podcast tomorrow. Like the game just looked like it was moving way faster than him. He just did not look. He just looked uncomfortable.
And another guy coming off of an injury, right? Hasn't played. Yeah. So I mean, maybe that's a part of it. We can roll through a couple of these shout outs and questions in here. Oh, look, Quinn Snyder. You want Quinn Snyder as the head coach for the Brooklyn?
Yeah, he's a great coach. That'd be a good ad. They're not going to do it, but I saw that comment. Yeah, Snyder's a great coach. That would be he's going to pick his spot for sure. So whenever that ends up happening, but because he's just got that kind of respect. But I mean, I'd be here for it.
Oh, of course. The one thing I'll say, maybe we'll talk about, but whether it was Markieff Morris or Yuta Watanabe, those would have been the two guys. Just to round out your thought on Sumner of like, why not go? Now I understand they're not as quick, whatever, but I would have gone with more size at that point. I would have just had it where I can rotate as many bodies as possible. I can try to be impactful on both ends of the floor, whatever. Just use the size to my advantage because by and large, especially on the offensive end, the lack of size at your guard spots really seemed to hamper the ability to go inside out and get near the basket a little bit more. So anybody that wants to roll through some questions here over on the YouTube side of things, mostly just statements. Mostly just statements about about which I understand. It's like, Zion looked absolutely great. He was crushing it. Like there's really no two ways about how this looks. Oh, we got one here. Should have played Yuta more. He adds length. I think, and this is where I, leader of the Yuta Watanabe fan club and building on Twitter, by the way, we got like 4 members now, Doug. So watch out. This is where like I have to take a little bit of the step back from like what things when I liked him in preseason. And Doug says, yeah, but think about how deep rotations are. Like this isn't a guy that's going to see the court a lot. And in a game that was getting away from them quickly here, he didn't see the game. He didn't see the court until it didn't matter anymore. So it doesn't mean that he can't get there as far as being a contributor for this team with more consistency. But when you see things looking a little clunky early, would you expect Nash and the staff to try to do something different sooner? Or does it almost make sense? Hey, our starting 5 is our best chance to win this game. If they can't get it going here over the first quarter and a half, then it's on. That's it. It's signed, sealed, and delivered. This game's gonna be a loss.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little surprised. I guess I'm just surprised. This is just gonna dovetail off the Sumner minutes. I'm just surprised that this is how the minutes went. Right, like so my projections for the Nets was pretty good around the starters. I had like 36. I had Simmons at 33. Didn't think he was going to foul out. Royce O'Neal at 33. But the bench, I had Patty at 16. But then here's the difference. I had Edmund Sumner at 5 and Markieff Morris at 15 because that just seemed like the way that the preseason was going. right? Like that's kind of felt like what we were doing. And then I had Watanabe I had him at 5. So I didn't really think he was going to play. But I guess like when those minutes go to someone else and you don't have anywhere else to go. Yeah, I probably would have played Morris here a little bit more, just based on what we saw from the preseason, based on, the length is going to be a problem. He's not fleet of foot, so you're going to lose the speed game for sure. Yeah, I just don't like when 19 minutes went to end in Sumner. Those are going to go away from somebody else. It's just super confusing. I don't want to harp on this point for too long, but
no, but I wouldn't hate like using Markieff Morris, especially like even after Ben Simmons' third foul. Hey, go ahead and throw Markieff Morris in there. Let him play a little physical. Let him take a couple fouls.
Thoughts on Simmons offensively tonight? I mean, an F. I don't know. Like
F minus. I don't. What do you want me? What are we grading
even
on?
To dissect? He was terrible. Like there's nothing. He was awful. There's nothing positive to say.
How many games do you give Sharp because he looked bad blowing layups?
He did actually look bad at blowing layups. He missed a ton of bunnies, probably at least 3. I'm not going to kill him so much because I thought he was active at least. Those will go down more times than they won't. It would not have turned the game around by any means, but I don't really blame guys for missing a few layups here and there because I think by and large, those shots will go down. And they just weren't tonight. It kind of seemed like a theme. Sometimes when it rains, it pours with these things. Nets felt like they missed a ton of easy shots on top of the hard ones that they missed. And so I don't know. I can't really blame Sharp. I actually didn't think Sharp was that bad in this game. I don't think he was by any means like gonna move the needle in terms of like winning the game or anything. But I mean, he's pretty far down the list of the reasons why they lost for me.
Well, I was going to say too, and isn't it something about like coming into the season, our perception, right? Like that's why I said, I thought, hey, Cam Thomas like looked all right out there because I have this bar of like, when I see you out there, I want you to look respectable. You look respectable. Same thing for Dayron. Like, do I think that he can develop? Of course I do. But when he's out there, you mentioned, I thought he had good energy. He's active in and around the boards. The bunnies don't go down. Okay, fine. But if you were in team Dayron should be starting, as we, some fans think that that's what should be happening here, then yeah, you're going to be more critical of his minutes off the bench if it doesn't look particularly good. But if you frame it as a high energy guy that can grab some boards for you, I think that that's the great first step forward for him this season. The shots will go more often and he'll get more boards. Like it's all good, but I don't have I can't set this type of like goal for him that isn't going to be attainable or I think is unrealistic for his season.
Yeah, like he played 23 minutes. So some of that was like last 4, that was garbage time or whatever. I think we did kind of see that this was going to be the matchup the kind of matchup that we thought that he would play when you're going against teams that just trend bigger across the back line in general. That's going to be the kind of matchup that he sees it in. If we look ahead to what they have coming up on just going ahead here, they play Toronto on Friday. I will preview this game tomorrow, but I don't think you see as much Sharp in that game. Like just because of the way they're effectively starting Pascal Siakam at the 5. That could be a Sharp no minutes game or something like that. It'd be interesting to see. So we'll preview that one tomorrow. We'll talk a little more about in the regular podcast about Sumner. Appreciate everyone that jumped in here onto YouTube. Like I said, we'll be coming at you with after every single game. Hopefully, the next one is a little better of an outcome. Go ahead.
I just remembering that this was being we were hyping this as being the post-game celebration of the Brooklyn Nets kickoff for the 2022-23 season. And listen, even though it was not that aforementioned celebration, we do appreciate everybody coming in. Listen, even in the worst of times, this can just be a dumping ground for the things that are frustrating you. And probably Doug and I trying to blow back against needing to go sign Hassan Whiteside for the next few weeks. But we'll get there together.
I'm not chicken little skies falling here. It's one game. You can turn things around. Like this is just the way basketball works. I mean, as we're talking right now, Phoenix is getting killed by Dallas. I mean, like, look, this is just kind of what happens. You don't want it to happen to your team, but the Knicks took Memphis to overtime, right? Like this is just stuff happens. I don't know.
Even worse too. And sorry, we'll get out of here, but even worse. And we're going to track this on the podcast episodes as well. The high five tracker. I don't even know if it got off the skids in this game. I don't think that the big 3 high fived one another once in this entire affair. So that's, if there's a correlation, you gotta trade them all. Slap those hands in a clapping motion together. You don't have a chance to win a ball game. That'll do it for us, I think, here on the post podcast. We'll see you guys tomorrow, as Doug would say, talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.
Take it easy.